What's going on, Bruce? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, guys. Awesome day.
Yes. We have been looking forward to this for a while, and thank you again for being here. So, where I was thinking I wanted to start was I was checking out your website, and you've graciously put up a very chronological bio, so it has really helped us in figuring out what we want to talk about. And
I need
it's
that for business. Business people, at least in my generation, kind of
Mhm.
wanted to know a little bit of linearity. What was the process, or at
Mhm.
least what were the milestones? So yeah, that's what I have for the general public.
Sure, yeah. Um, and it seems where I wanted to go selfishly in the beginning was about your acting career because a lot of listeners don't know, but I was a theater kid. I went to school for the arts and I was in the theater program in Brooklyn. And I would be so curious to know because it seemed like you had already been interested in things sort of outside of whatever would be classified social norm, whether it was high performance or spirituality or things sort of outside of
Yeah, right.
oneself when young. And I remember when I was coming out of high school and I was auditioning for colleges for theater, and I was already starting to like book auditions and stuff like that. And there came a point in my reality where I saw that like coming out of I don't know if they had this reference when you were younger, but it was like theater kids, like the idea of theater kids and how they're
Yeah.
like and what they're like
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah. Totally.
and all
Totally.
that stuff. And so what I found was when I was coming out of high school and I was going to auditions or going to colleges, I was like, wow, it's like high school never ends. Like that's what I started to notice was like these people just kind of stay the same way. And now I can say, well, no judgment. But at the time it was like absolute judgment. I can't be here. I can't deal with this drama. I got to go find something else. And that's
Yeah.
when I really started to dig into these other realms. So I'm curious to know if you had that awareness when you were coming out of high school or going into theater programs and what your take on it all was.
That's a great question. I've often described myself in getting into the acting profession as I was not a theater kid. So it came as a huge shock to me that I actually had some talent and got into it, and it was kind of a meteoric. I mean, I didn't get a ton of fame, but from never performing at all to lead role in the longest running musical in the world in 2 years. That's pretty quick. And yeah, so as a kid, I was much more interested in social issues. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I had two brothers off in Vietnam. And one of them was a conscientious objector and was against all war, and they drafted him anyway. And they made him a medic on a helicopter evacuation team during the Tet Offensive, which was the height of the worst part of the war. While he was hoisting a wounded soldier up from an active battle, he was shot by a sniper. My brother was, and he survived. And if you're going to get shot by a sniper, be in a medical evacuation helicopter because they were lifted off, took him to Da Nang, where there was a big military hospital. They fixed him up enough and then shipped him off to Japan, where it took months to recover from this wound. But that affected me deeply. And that era of the late 60s, early 70s of tremendous social unrest. I mean, now, protests in the street, which are common, they were common in the 60s. We were the generation of protesting. We were out there for civil rights. Civil Rights Act wasn't even passed until 1964. African Americans couldn't even vote until then. And even after it was passed, it wasn't like everybody said, oh yeah, sure, great, let's just switch and drop all of our racists. Not at all. So there was a tremendous amount of unrest. And I was coming from white privilege, but a family that was very conscious of we have more and we've got to be aware of our fellow of humanity. And my parents were actually both pacifists, meaning against all war. They'd come to that conclusion individually during the Second World War, that all war was inherently bad and no one was going to win. It was going to just keep us stuck in a cycle of violence and more violence and more violence and never resolve the fundamental issues separating us as humans. So I grew up in a household like that at a time when the culture was going through this wrenching change from kind of the quietness and peacefulness of the 50s, relatively, post-war there was a boom, and we didn't have to fight wars anymore. So America got strong, and the economy just went crazy, and people were getting their dream homes, as my parents did. And so there was relative peace. But then the 60s was like, what happened? Between these, Vietnam, why are we killing hundreds of thousands of people in Vietnam? Really, what kind of a danger to us exactly? They're about to invade us. Is that what we're saying? Let alone that and everything else. But also at that time, there was this enormous cultural explosion that was happening. The Beatles, of course, was one huge example, but Motown, I mean, just artists, poetry, beat poetry that had been going for just so many things that were just exploding because the culture was kind of breaking out of its shackles. My generation was. Not all of us, clearly, because most of the people in power now are in my age group, and they don't necessarily believe what I believe. But there was a tremendous, many of us that were very much along those lines of those movements. And so as a kid, I kind of imagined I would be a teacher or a minister, although I thought minister, the only problem with that is I don't know any church that would actually accept me because my views are too not mainstream as a teenager already, right? And, I believed in a higher power, but like, I felt like sharing something around that, but what the form would be, I was clueless. But I've been a musician. I'm getting around to your question, Jesse. I'm also a storyteller, in case you hadn't noticed. Mm-hmm. So I've been a musician since I was 8, and family of singers. And when I was in grade school and high school, my oldest cousin was a major star on Broadway, and I just idolized the man. His name is David Cryer. And David has many claims to fame, but he was in the original cast of 1776 on Broadway. He was, for 19 years, he was in Phantom of the Opera, 6 years on Broadway. Many things, the Leonard Bernstein Mass. He had shows written for him in the 70s. He was a fantastic singer, kind of a classic leading man look, just handsome and a really good guy. And he was my oldest cousin. So he was way like 18 years older than me, something like that. And I just idolized the guy. And yet it didn't turn into, I want to be that. But I just thought, man, this is the coolest guy ever. And when he got his big break in the early 60s, when he got into a show called The Fantasticks. And we all went to see it. The family went to see it. I was like 8 or 9. First show I ever saw in New York. And the listeners, many won't know what that show is because it's been closed now for 7 or 8 years in New York, but it was open for 55 years in New York City. Longest running musical in the world, has the record as no show has been continuously on longer than that. And so that was the show, was my first show that I ever saw, and it was in its maybe 3rd year. It was still a relatively new show. It hadn't quite become the cult classic which is why it stayed open for so long in the city. So there I am, this little 9-year-old kind of watching this show and think, God, this is so magical. And it's a very charming show. Jess, you're a theater kid, so it sounds like you might know The Fantasticks.
No, I don't.
Okay. It's a love story, a romantic comedy, but it's magical. It's written in this kind of timeless way where it stayed open for 55 years because it was this sort of perfect little jewel of beautiful music, charming story. It was about a boy and a girl. I was the boy. I ended up playing 800 performances as the boy. So every night I got to win the girl. I got to be slapped by the girl. I got to lose the girl, and I got to win her back at the end and live happily ever after. And so 800 times doing that, it wasn't bad, right? Mm-hmm. But before I got there was this period of time when I was much more the social activist kid, organizing protests on the lawn of my high school to just quietly protest the Vietnam War, quietly protest the lack of civil rights, etc. In a school that was all white. I think there was 1 black student out of 1,000, and even among the white, it was WASPs, Italians, and Jews basically, and 1 black kid.
Where did you grow? You said you grew up in the Upper West?
No, in New Jersey, suburban town called Milburn, Short Hills.
Okay,
yeah. And but I was a musician. I was a trumpet player. So through grade school and what we used to call junior high, and then high school, I got pretty good. I played in the New Jersey Junior Symphony, and never wanted to do it as a career. I didn't think I was that good, and it didn't make my heart sing that much, but I enjoyed it. I was into music. The family was into music, having the cousin on Broadway, and my father was a really good singer and all this. And my junior year in high school, the school hired a vocal music teacher who came in from the city with his entourage, and he had lighting designer and costume designer, choreographer, who I later found out was his lover. And it was just this magical transformation of our school. And I was the first trumpet in the orchestra. So I was playing for the shows that he was putting on. We went from no musical theater at all to West Side Story in the first year, Carmina Burana, and opera in his first year, holiday shows. It was just like, what happened? And all the theater kids, back to your phrase, all the theater kids in the school just felt like they had died and gone to heaven. What is happening here? This is amazing. And these professionals helping out, not just the teacher. And I'm sitting in the orchestra playing trumpet, and he also ran a choir at a big church in Newark, and I'd go down there on Easter and Christmas and play in a little brass choir that he would invite in. So I was getting to know him musically. And after one show at the end of my junior year, I was noticing all these friends up on stage having a great time, and I'm sitting down there in the pit playing my trumpet. And I would go up to him after the show, and I said, Mr. Pickett, I like playing in the orchestra, but it really looks fun up on stage. How do I do that? And he kind of smiled, and I remember sort of a twinkle in his eye when I said this. He said, you just sign up for the chorus. No audition necessary. Just you'll be in the chorus, and then whatever. So next year rolls around, senior year, and he starts working with all the new kids. So I was one of the new kids in the chorus, even though I was a senior. And he kept asking me back, like, come in at free periods and after school. I was starting to work on songs with him. I'm thinking, this is great, awesome. I'm getting like a private teacher. I just wanted to join the chorus. And after about 2 months of this, we were rehearsing for something. I mean, I was just singing songs with him in the auditorium, and he takes me to the back of the auditorium because there were kids starting to kind of, why is this Mr. Pickett keeps working with Bruce? And so he takes me to the back where nobody can hear him. And he said, all the theater kids want to know what the big show is, because now he had set a high bar last year, West Side Story, Carmina Burana, and all this stuff. And he said, I'm not telling anybody what the show is yet, but I'll tell you. I was also like the co-president of the student body, so I was kind of a guy. So he tells me, so it's going to be the show called Carousel. I had no idea what the fuck Carousel was, which was a good thing. Had I known, I would have completely freaked out when what he's about to tell me. And he said, and you're going to play the lead. And I was kind of like, what? I don't remember auditioning. I hadn't. And he said, but don't worry, the show's not till May, so we've got 8 months. I'll put you in the holiday show. You'll sing a couple solos to get used to being on stage. I had literally never sung a solo anywhere on stage. And by May, he'd worked with me for months and months and months, and we did the show. And it was a blast, although I felt very inhibited still. I didn't feel like now I'm like all out there, and changed a lot as time went on. But back then I was still very restrained. But I had a good time, and I enjoyed it. And I thought, well, this was fun. And my cousin David came to see me one night. And I had a mix of like awe and like thrilled that he actually showed up. Like, man, dude, thank you. And also a bit freaked out that my cousin, the amazing Broadway star, was actually in the audience. He writes me this long letter afterwards, handwritten letter on parchment. I saved it for years. One of those, you'd never forget those letters in it. And he gave me a lot of good feedback, like basically you can let go a little bit. You've got a natural governor on your system. You're never going to go too far. So just go ahead and try, because you need to let go more. I thought, I'm sure he's right. I don't even know what that means yet, but I'm sure that's right. And, but he basically said, you have a gift and you should go for it, and I'll help you. And so I ended up getting into the Oberlin College and Conservatory, which was one of the top 10, if not top 5 best school for the performing arts. Mm-hmm. And my education there, the training I got in voice and dance and theater was just remarkable and fantastic. When I was there, especially in the conservatory, which is it's a part of the college, it's 500 students all intending on having professional careers in music. So there were piano majors, organ majors, voice majors, violin majors, conducting majors, composition majors. Brilliant. I mean, some of the friends I made in those years became huge stars. And I noticed the phenomena at the time of these kids, unlike me, who, I played my trumpet an hour a day to be good enough to be in the orchestra and the band. That was about, and I played in the school, band, but there were kids in the college that were like, this is all they did. Like for 8 hours a day, they were playing piano, and their personalities were like, showed it. Their personalities hadn't evolved since they started taking piano, like at age 8 or age 10 or whatever. And you could feel this kind of icky thing, and like, oh, I don't want to be around them, and similarly with the theater kids or the dance kids, because I was in kind of several different groupings, because I was in the dance gang, I was in the dance company at my college, and I was doing straight theater in the college, and I was doing opera and musical theater. So I was kind of into all of it, and all these different little cliques. It's kind of like, this is interesting. I'm kind of like not into any of them as cliques. I just like, I like the people that are the biology majors too. So anyway, I found, I got really fortunate and got into this show, The Fantasticks, which was the kind of wild twist to the story that through a series of very fortunate events, I ended up meeting the guys who wrote The Fantasticks 11 years later after I'd first seen it. And they saw me do a little thing in the city, and they invited me to audition for the show. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. This is too wild that I'm, first of all, getting to meet them, and they're inviting me to come audition. Long story short, I entered the show. I was a sophomore at Oberlin at the time. I entered the show that summer. It was my summer job for 2 months. I did 64 performances between semesters, and it kind of got me into the professional thing. And I stayed, I was in and out. I was in the professional world for about 5 years. Fantastic was a big part of that, but I did commercials. I did, tours of different things, a show one summer, Shakespeare in the Park one summer. Had a lot of fun, but at a certain point, I realized I wasn't a theater kid. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That as much as I loved doing it, as much as shocked as I was that I'd found myself in this career, many a night I'd look around and thinking, I'm in the longest running musical in the world. How did I get here? I never saw this. I never envisioned this. This was never a dream of mine consciously. And yet once I was in it, it was like a dream come true. Like, wow, I'm pinching myself. This is amazing. But at a certain point, I realized there was more to me than that. And
what was that?
It was the desire back from the 60s, the desire to help and to care about what matters in the world, not just entertain people, but to share and to inspire them and to speak up for things that are out of whack in society. And it caused me to leave the show business. Like I got out of the Fantasticks. I resigned. I mean, I basically said, guys, I've done 800 performances and it's time for me to go on to the next thing. And they were incredibly gracious and lovely. And that allowed me to kind of give some time to thinking about what I wanted to do. And I ended up moving to California with my girlfriend and cut all ties to the musical theater world and all ties to show business. Thought I would never come back to New York, never perform again. It was like a wonderful part of my life, but it was then. And now the rest of my life is serving and learning about myself and growing and doing everything I can to have a great life. And then shockingly, I ended up getting back into it several years ago. And
wow.
It always comes back. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Ruben.
I was just going to ask, because I listened to a podcast that you were on. I forget the name this week. And that, I think it was like a 2-year stint that you took time off to kind of find it. I don't know if I heard that correctly on the podcast, but that you traveled through America, right? Before you moved to California, or you lived in like a community. That experience, like what caused this, like, oh, this is what I want to get into during that time that you spent just like kind of, as people would say nowadays, like finding yourself or rediscovering. I like to say rediscovering who you truly are. So like what happened in that like stint before?
Yeah. Well, during the college years, partly because of dance, partly because of just what was going on at Oberlin, I was getting into things like meditation. I took a whole intensive on Tai Chi in like 1972 or 73 or something. And I was because of the dance I was doing, which was mostly contemporary style. We were getting into a lot of things that were very meditative, and I was learning mime and carnival technique and all kinds of things that were very much about self-awareness. You know, as Jesse, I'm sure, can relate to, the work of becoming an actor is first and foremost about becoming aware of what's even going on and tapping into parts of yourself you didn't even know you had, and you realize, I can feel anger. Sure enough, I can, and I can speak, and I can express that. I can do that. You know, whereas before, maybe you didn't think you had that in you. So there's a lot of self-awareness, and with that, I was just naturally kind of spiritually oriented person. Since I was a teenager, I was already reading Hermann Hesse and Henry David Thoreau and people that were the transcendentalists, as they were called back in the mid 1800s, Emerson and Thoreau and people like that. I was drawn to that. My parents were pacifists. I had stuff in the house about nonviolence. The heroes of my family were Martin Luther King and Gandhi and people like that. And so, I mean, I'm not saying that automatically I would be that way, because my oldest brother went in the Air Force as soon as he left college. He wasn't like my parents, but I did. It was kind of like that. Yeah, this feels right to me. Amazing to have parents like this. So in fact, it kind of reminded me when Daniel Roth talking about his super hipster mom. And I thought, well, my mother was making granola and doing tie-dyed t-shirts for me in the late 60s and doing macrame things on my shirts. So they would look kind of Woodstocky. You know, my mother was doing that for me, you know, so I was very fortunate in a lot of that. So, so the seeds of all that were already at work before I really became professional in all the acting. And that had been such a strong part of my life that it kind of never went away. I kept asking myself, how did you get here? Like I said a minute ago, how did you get here? This is not at all where you thought you'd be. And where is that part of you that's really yearning to help and so interested in humanity and people? And gradually I found I was getting more and more interested in what the audience was feeling than I was in the performing I was doing. In other words, you know, and Jesse, I'm sure you can relate to this, when you're in a house, a theater, where you can really see people, see their expressions, you connect with an audience way differently than if they're just out in the dark and you can't see what's going on. You hear them laugh, maybe hear them applaud. But when you can really see them and watch their expressions, and I could in this Fantasticks.
Yeah.
So I would feel what they were feeling.
Yeah, we had in our high school, we had a black box theater. And so everyone was like right there, you know.
Oh, wow.
Everyone was like, you could just see them. There would be, and a lot of times we would do shows, we'd break the fourth wall, and we would just, we got to interact with the audience almost all the time.
Well, I had to imagine interacting with the audience. I had to imagine conversations with the young couple and the girl that appeared to be their 12-year-old daughter. I would imagine little stories about them, and I would notice that I'm like way more interested in what makes people tick and what are their lives like. And it used to hit me that I would think to myself, you know, this is an amazing show to be in. People love it. They come to see this show because it's heartwarming. People in my generation from New York, when they hear this is the show I was in for 800 performances, they say, you were? When were you in it? I'm sure I saw it. Because back in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, it was like one of the it shows. It was like one of the, of course you saw the Fantasticks. What do you mean you haven't seen the Fantasticks? It was that kind of thing. And there was a great love for it. But anyway, I just was paying attention to what my heart was telling me. And my girlfriend, who was a very successful actress in her own right, and had started a few years ahead of me, we were both starting to get restless. And we had this idea to buy a motorhome. And we did. And the idea was to travel for several months. We didn't do 2 years, but we did probably the part of just what you heard in the story. We traveled all over the United States, 15,000-mile trip, 40 states. It was just to see the beauty of the U.S., to see experience the culture. My girlfriend had never been over the Hudson River except to fly to L.A. to do a TV thing. I mean, she grew up in Long Island, lived in the city. I think she went to Jersey once or twice. I mean, literally, she'd been to Florida one time. She had zero travel. I'd done a little bit more. So it was just a chance to kind of unplug, and we had done well. You know, we didn't have to worry about working for a while, so we were in good shape in that way. And it was an eye-opening trip, and it convinced us that we would leave our careers. And we thought we were going to give it 2 years. Initially, we thought, we're good at commercials. We can make a lot of money in commercials. Let's not get tied down into an actual show. or touring or out of town, just do the bread and butter, high value for a short amount of time, like commercials. And 2 years from now, we'll move to the West Coast, because we were definitely, by that point, we'd done numerous trips to the Bay Area and just felt so at home there. We're like, we're supposed to live here. And 2 years shrank. About 6 months later, we were sitting in Roosevelt Raceway in Long Island in our motorhome. We had a little art business at the time, and a little side thing that I was doing art, and so was my girlfriend, and we'd go to flea markets and Central Park and sell our stuff just for weekend money. It was not a big thing, although we had some shops in the city and Beverly Hills carrying our stuff, but it was not a big money maker. It was just pure fun and creativity. We're sitting there one morning, and it was pouring down rain, so basically the swap meet was out for the day, and she was like pissed. And it was like, man, why are we still here? Why are we still in New York? And I said, well, I'm on 2 softball teams in Central Park in 2 different leagues, and both teams are probably going to make the playoffs. That's an important reason to stay. And I'm kind of laughing at myself as I'm saying it, right? And she's laughing too. And okay, when should we leave? And 10 days later, we left and drove to where we wanted to visit, the first place we wanted to visit. And once we got there and hung out for about a week in a redwood forest, not far from Silicon Valley, it was like, we're staying. And I didn't leave for almost 40 years. I mean, not that place, but it became quite a journey of then the real work that I knew I was supposed to do, that wasn't just about the performing anymore. Until I reached a point where I realized, but I have more to do with the performing. And so that was a whole nother chapter of the last few years.
Yeah, so this is where I was, for me personally, most interested in digging into, because right now, we, at least my generation, we live in a world where personal development is like a section in the bookstore. You know what I mean? Like, you can go and you can find it, and it's widely accepted, and everyone's got a meditation app. Everyone understand the world of the self, and to some degree there's some level of normalcy to it. I'm really curious, when you moved out in the 70s and you started exploring these realms, like, can you give, because a lot of people who are listening are around our age, can you give us a little perspective on how different it was at the time to find teachers, or to find what was it? In some ways, I wonder if it was more difficult or less difficult, because now there's so much noise that it can be hard to like weed it out. But yeah, if you could take us down, like, if from what you can create in your mind, sort of a map of how you started to learn more about yourself and your interaction with the world, and who you sought out, or like what books or what courses or teachers or mentors in your life that really started to create, jumps in your evolution.
Fantastic question. Very aware question too, Jesse. You can tell you've been walking down these paths for a while. That's awesome.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, no, awesome. And I'm sure that's why you work with Pam. Ruben, in case you didn't know, that's how Jesse and I met, was through Pam Gold and Portal.
She's been on our podcast as well.
I bet she has. Awesome. First of all, one of the things that is absolutely true about this whole world of personal growth and spiritual development and all this, California is 20 years ahead of the rest of the world. That's just the way it is. Coming back to New York 3 years ago, from having lived out there for so long, I was reminded, oh yeah, it's just not as far along. There's more density here. Partly it's just the nature of a city like New York, but it's also something I think about the Northeast that hangs on to mind knowledge so hard. I think partly because of the Ivy League, partly because of the power structures of Washington, New York, Boston, all of that. But it's just very mind oriented. I love that. I mean, I'm running a university in Connecticut right now, but it's not enough, right? You got to, the mind untethered is, which it is in most people, unfortunately, not tethered to the heart. Good luck with that. Humanity is going to destroy itself as long as we stay on that track. So first of all, there's just been, the exploration started much earlier in California than it did back here. So back in the 70s, you know, it was like, it seemed like everybody and his brother were already into stuff like this. I mean, not quite, but it's just different. And so the level of people even then who were far along a path of spirituality and meditation and yoga practice was quite common. I mean, it's no accident the peace and love generation started in San Francisco. And so the Bay Area spawned so much that became globally influential. A place you guys may not have heard of called Esalen is the home of much of the transformational movement. And it's this retreat center on the Big Sur coast that was established by a few guys over 50 years ago, back in the 60s. And it's the spiritual home of tens of thousands of people, including many of the elders now from my generation, but even younger generation people like, man, Esalen, there's nothing like Esalen. Well, that was established in that area back in the 60s by people who were all from that area, who all kind of were in and around the Bay Area. And it's also no accident that the Bay Area is the home of some of what started out as some of the most creative companies in the world, Apple and Google and Facebook, and on the list goes. Whatever your opinions of them now, when they started, it was because there was this massive amount of creativity and openness. And you'd have these startup guys that were like New York startup guys, only they were fine saying they meditated. You know, that's been fine a lot longer. Burning Man is a California phenomenon. When I moved to Marin County, it was like, what do you mean you haven't been to Burning Man? It's been going on for 20 years, dude. Where have you been at? You know, and so there's a certain level of acceptance and openness in the Bay Area in particular, but all of California, that just got started way earlier. And I don't know all the reasons why so many people were drawn there to do their spiritual work and then evolved there, but it just is what happened. I'm not saying everything started there, hardly, but there was just so much. And the California vibe of it's amazing weather almost all year long, and it's an open culture. It's an abrasive culture, similar to New York City in a certain way. I mean, New York is part of why I came back, is like, New York is like, damn, we're proud that we're the home of immigrants. We're proud that we got 225 languages spoken in this city. What do you mean keep immigrants out? What do you mean make it hard for immigrants? You got to be kidding me. That's not what New York's about. But California is a similar vibe of, we're a completely polyglot state. We're like everything. And we should all have learned Spanish in school because of the number of people that speak Spanish in that state. But it's just got that vibe. And there's part of it is the surfer part of California, like, hey, chill, it's all fine. You're kind of that vibe. But then there's the more elevated vibe that's just more open. So help direct me back to where you want me to go, because there's so many directions I can go with this because I've lived all these years.
What I was curious to know is, I mean, thank you for that. It gives, perspective on why, like, kind of how you were able to navigate through discovering these things. It seems like it really wasn't that, like, it wasn't as off kilter as I may believe it was, or something like that. I'm curious to know, so who were the major influences?
The influences, yeah, thank you. Well, I have to say that one of the biggest influences of all was when I first read a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a huge classic, and many of my dearest friends, including Pam Gold, one of the most influential books I think of her life, but for sure in mine.
Do you know who Paul Chek is?
Say the name?
Paul Chek.
I don't know.
I wanted to connect you guys too. He runs a Holistic Health and Performance Institute out in San Diego. He's one of my biggest influences, and The Autobiography of a Yogi is one of his most impactful books as well. So,
and the reason it was for me, it opened a world to me as you hear this man talk about his childhood being raised around gurus and kind of wild magical things that just sort of casually happened in his village, things appearing and disappearing, and people who could just manifest an apple or whatever it was. And this was just sort of commonplace in how he was raised. And of course, the development of his own self and his own powers, if you will. But there was some kind of authenticity and purity in his message that spoke to millions and millions and millions of people. And my generation was probably, I mean, his books had come out already, but it was the peace and love generation. It was like, oh man, made for us, because here is a person of enormous intelligence. Clearly, this was not just someone spouting spiritual platitudes without anything to back it up. You had the sense that there's a power here. And I have to say, one kind of wild story among many that I've heard other people tell too. In reading the book, you kind of get this sense that weird stuff might happen as a result of reading this book, weird good stuff. And so one day I'm juicing, and I was juicing all the time, and I was growing every kind of sprout you could imagine, mostly legal ones. And I was juicing carrot and beet juices one day, and we have a rectangular shaped juicer that sent the pulp into a clear bin on the right-hand side. So you could see it getting higher and higher. And all of a sudden I was noticing I think I'd started with carrots, and then I switched to beets. And so there was a very clear line, right, where the difference, because it was all kind of going around in a circle. And as it kept taking shape, I'm looking at this shape, and I'm thinking, God, what is that reminding me of? That is so familiar looking. I finally thought, I got to get the cover of the book. And I ran and got the cover of the book. The outline that was being shaped between the red and the orange was exactly the hairline of the picture of Yogananda on the cover of the book, even the same size. I mean, it wasn't just a shape like that. It was like, they were very specific. And I thought, oh, fuck, this is exactly and the same size. Now, the skeptics would say, you just want to read that into it. And I'd say, fine, that's fine. That's fine. I don't need to convince you. I know what I know, and I know what I've experienced since. But that book was hugely influential to just kind of crack open a part of me that could become receptive to the possibility that we are so much more than what our mind thinks we are as humans. And so, as I've often said, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's really hard to it's impossible to put it back in. I mean, you can be in your down moments and your dark moments, and I've had them, and I've had deeply depressed moments, never clinical depression, but just like, man, what the fuck is going on in my life? And have I made just terrible decisions? And I've definitely had those times, right? So, and some significant times where that's happened, including the move back to New York. But there would still always be, in my case, a deeper understanding of, no, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And this pain that you're in now is part of the process, man. It's not like no pain, no gain. But when it comes to spiritual development, some of the things that you have to transcend are painful to let go of. They just are. I mean, it's just comes with the territory. So the Yogananda influence, and Yogananda, of course, spawned a significant network of people. And there were several places in California, one of which in LA that I was traveling to LA quite a lot in the 80s. I would always spend time he had a place called the Lake Shrine in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard near the ocean. And I went there again 10 months ago. First time I've been there in over 30 years. And it was a magical spot, and still is. So he had created this lovely little haven, a shrine, a beautiful pond and beautiful gardens. And so, but he also spawned communities of people. And so that was all part of what was happening at the time. And then the Beatles had already come along and introduced us to the world of transcendental meditation and made gurus a thing. Like that was not a thing until the 60s and 70s, where people would go off and study with a Swami or go off and study with somebody who fashioned themselves a guru because they had been part of a lineage connected to Yogananda or connected to Maharishi or somebody. So it was a period where we were suddenly learning about these mystical, brilliant people of high intelligence, in some cases crawling on the floor behind you. Got you. We were being introduced to even the idea that there were these remarkably wise seers, some of whom seemed to have these kind of remarkable powers too. A lot of them were Indian. And so this was infusing our culture at that time. And suddenly it was like having a guru became a thing. Like, what do you mean you don't have a guru? That became a thing, more so in the 70s and 80s. But especially California, that would be like, kind of got started out there. So, but the Yogananda and that whole vein, to me, always had a purity to it that was devoid. I mean, a lot of those guys, kind of like the televangelists, some of them were not all as pure as you wanted to believe. They were hitting their own scandals of, all kinds of weird stuff. But there's a purity to some of it, like Yogananda especially.
Yeah. This just raises a question. Was there any experimentation with psilocybin and or other psychedelics during this time for you?
Yeah. Not so much. I didn't do psilocybin back then. Back then, for me, it was a lot of weed. There was two strands. There was the party strand that was about weed and coke. I tried coke one time. It gave me such a terrible post-nasal drip and fucked up my voice. I thought, there's no way I could ever do this again. I'm a singer. This is like the worst. I didn't even feel that great as a result of it. I was, at the time, THC was a thing. A lot of people were taking THC, and I have one memorable experience of taking some before a performance, and I barely made it through the whole performance. And it showed me the power of the brain, because there was one point during the show where I was so out of it, and yet I completely forgot cognitively what the next line was. And something kicked in from the medulla oblongata or somewhere, some part of my brain that said the words. And I was like, how are they being spoken now? I cannot think what these words are. And out it came, like, thank you, wherever that came from. So I was exploring to some degree. I mean, it kind of became more so. It was a combination at the time. There was the genuine exploring that was going on, that was in more of the psychedelics like acid, especially. And there was some stuff going on in my circles in New York of mushrooms and things like that. But a lot of the use for me, it was the actor crowd. So it was weed and coke and stuff like that, and acid occasionally. I didn't get that much into that. Later on, I did experiment with everything from EMDR, EMDA, and DMT. I've had my experiences with DMT, which is a whole nother conversation. Very, very powerful and amazing. And
when was that?
That was 3 years ago.
That was 3 years ago. Okay, so we will get there.
4 years ago. 4 years ago. Yeah, long years in between.
We've got time. Cool, man. Well, Ruben, anything on your end?
Yeah, I think I kind of wanted to transition, because I know we spoke about the art part a lot, and then part of your story, and I know you talked about this heavily in some other podcasts, about you getting into HeartMath and being one of the first, founding members, I would say. In HeartMath, and I've read books like Dr. Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural, where he references a lot of your studies. So when Jesse first told me about that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember reading about HeartMath and everything they've done and Becoming Supernatural, and like Googling it and like doing all that stuff. And I was like, oh my God, like Bruce is one of the founding members, and even held the forefront and held the torch for a while. So like, I mean, we don't have to stick too long in this, because I know you've spoken about it in a lot of other podcasts. So, but I want to hear about that experience. You did that for a while, like getting into that. And then like, you experienced I believe 2 to 3 years, you had that cancer scare. So I just want to hear that part of your life, because it's so fascinating from what I've heard so far.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, and leading into that, I think a great way to segue in is if you could just take from where in your journey were you at as you were exploring yourself and building upon your understanding of the world. At what point in that journey did HeartMath sort of emerge into your life?
Yeah, great. So the chronology is 78 is the year I left New York. My girlfriend and I moved to California, got set up in this town in a redwood forest. It was gorgeous and 45 minutes away from Silicon Valley, where all that action was going on. But it felt like a million miles away, because it was a redwood forest and just clear air and just pristine. And it was a combination of, the town was a combination of people that chop wood for a living, living next door to people who were inventing the next silicon chip, living next door to guys cooking meth in their bathtub. I mean, it was like, it was a real mixed kind of neighborhood of people kind of off the grid, not wanting to be down in the valley where all the craziness was. And I'll stay up here and do whatever I do. So I had moved, my girlfriend and I both moved into a community, which was a spiritual community of sorts, that also had a university and also had some businesses. So I got involved with that and stayed with that for about 8 or 9 years. And during that time, I met the man who later would found HeartMath. So back around 1980, I met this guy named Doc Childrey, who is the founder, the actual founder of HeartMath. So 1980, I met him when he came to visit this group that I was already part of, and I was running their publishing company for it at the time. And so he and I connected in a really cool way. I thought, this is one of the smartest, most caring, most intuitive guys I've ever met in my life. I can barely understand him because his Southern accent is so thick, and he's shattering all my stereotypes about anybody with this thick of a Southern accent must be a redneck and must not be caring or of any interest to me. And he kind of shattered all of that in one conversation, and became a very dear friend and mentor and teacher eventually. So I met him in 1980, but he didn't have a thing called HeartMath yet. He was still kind of figuring out what he wanted to do and how to serve in the world the most. So there was the period of the 80s for me where I was mostly working in this nutrition company. We were the first ones to bring spirulina to the United States, which now is a highly regarded superfood. Back then, it had a heyday in the early 80s of explosion of interest, and it became the thing. It became like the hottest for about a year or two. It was like the hottest thing in health, what we used to call health foods back in the day. And so I was head of marketing for all that, and it was a meteoric rise and then crash, unfortunately. But meanwhile, I had gotten back in touch with this guy, Doc Childrey, back in the late 80s, like around 87 or so. And he had evolved a lot since I'd seen him several years earlier. And he was talking more and more about wanting to set up a place, and that his work was all about the heart. And he had come to a conclusion through many years of study and meditation and fasting. And he actually was a breatharian for over a year, meaning he survived on water only. He had studied lives of saints who became so involved, who became so filled with the Spirit of God, they could live on communion wafers. And he would read stories about this, saying that he believed that was possible. And he set about to do it, and he did it for a year. And I wasn't with him at the time. I was not around him when that was happening, but I was fascinated with him. But his work was all evolving into, it's all about the heart, that what's missing in the world largely is the heart. And we're crashing and burning because there's not enough heart, there's not enough compassion, there's not enough understanding, there's not enough love. And so as he began to think in the late 80s, began to formulate what he wanted to create, he and I were in touch, and I was very drawn to wanting to help him. And partly the reason was that he had a vision that for this to succeed at a time, this was now the late 80s, where self-development was a major thing. And California was the home of so much of it. I mean, back in the 70s, something became hugely popular called EST, which was founded in the town I lived in later called Sausalito. It was called Earhart Seminar Training, EST. It was a huge thing. It had some scandals, so they changed the name to Landmark Forum, and then just Landmark, and then Forum. And it started out as, it was called EST, and the guy who founded it lived on a houseboat in the town of Sausalito, where I later moved into. He was part of that same gang that started Esalen, and we're starting, so many things that all happened that became called the transformational movement. So, so the late 80s, this is already a thing, and a lot of things were coming out of California because people were coming there to experiment and to whatever they were doing. That's when Burning Man was getting started back around those times too. And so part of the appeal for me with HeartMath was that he wanted to take a scientific approach. He said, and I used to joke, like, the world needs another self-help system from California. Like, no, it didn't. But if there was one based on science, where we were using mainstream science to validate concepts which formerly were only seen as spiritual or a bit fringy. That's new. No one was doing that. I mean, Maharishi with TM was getting scientific data to validate TM, and that was a game changer for a lot of people. Like actual evidence, well done studies showing reductions in blood pressure, improvements in brain chemistry, all kinds of things that TM was proving. We said that we have to do that. We have to create a system that we can validate with science. Otherwise, no organization worth its salt will want to buy into it. No government agency, no military, no school, no church, nobody will. We'll have the fringe people that go to California to go on retreats, but that's not game changer kind of stuff. So we recognized we needed to become scientific. And so that was part of the vision. I said, I'm all in with that, because I've got enough of the skeptical New Yorker that will always be in me, that, you know, I love to experiment. I love to try things. And I'm also really curious. Show me the evidence again. Not that I'm not willing to have my experience without it, but my mind loves that too. You know, it's both. It's not one or the other. So I love that. So we started the organization in 1990, and I was part of the team, as you said, Ruben. And I was part of the leadership group initially. There was about 8 of us that worked closely with Doc, but there was a bigger group altogether. There was about 30 of us involved. And I'm still involved. I mean, I don't work formally for the company and haven't for about 5 years now, but I formally worked for the company for over 20, almost 25, and was CEO for 11 years. And so I was very involved because I was in the leadership team, and I worked closely with Doc, as did a number of us. And I put on, well, I hit the 1 million mile mark in United Airlines about 10 years ago. And so I was traveling all over the world, teaching, consulting, leading workshops in Hong Kong, in Amsterdam, in London, in Cape Town. I mean, literally all over the world, because it became more and more mainstream as time went on.
Did you guys already have technology in place like you do now with the sensors?
Nothing.
Or using techniques and like EKGs or something to show that this was working?
Yeah. So the question around technology. So we were using technology to measure in the lab what was happening when we were teaching people HeartMath techniques, and but we didn't come out with our own technology until the end of 1999. So HeartMath formally launched in 1991. We were already operating, but 1991 is the official start date. But it was 9 years before we had our own technology that we made available to the public. But for the previous 5 years, we'd gotten so deep into a particular thing called heart rate variability, which became a huge thing. And I put a pat on the back to all of us at HeartMath, because before we came along, heart rate variability, I mean, maybe we're taking too much credit, but I don't think so. Heart rate variability was a well-respected branch within cardiology, but only used for research, really only for people at high risk of heart disease, heart attacks, things like that. It wasn't something that the general cardiologists were teaching or using with their patients much. Somebody really in bad shape, they'd run 24 hours of data on them and send it off to somebody who understood heart rate variability and would analyze it and send it back and say, oh, you got a problem here, blah, blah, blah. We came along at the suggestion of somebody who said heart rate variability, the fact that every human's heart changes in certain patterns based on what type of emotion we're feeling. That idea was new to us. Nobody had thought of that. Nobody was testing that. So we established, now it's well understood, that any kind of what we would call stressful or depleting emotion, anger, fear, worry, depression, anxiety, anything we would consider stressful, creates a pattern in our heart that looks jagged and all over the place like an earthquake. It's undeniable and absolutely replicable. It's like every human. Just ask them to think about something where they really got mad or really got depressed, and their heart's going to go into that pattern. On the other hand, when you remember something that you're grateful for, and you just think about how you feel and the gratitude you feel when you think about that, we started to notice every single person we would ask to do that, their heart would go into this beautiful, smooth pattern, like a sine wave, just completely smooth. And moments ago, when we had talked to them about frustration, it was all over the place, jagged and chaotic. Just to have them focus on gratefulness or appreciation or compassion, and the heart just becomes this beautiful, moving rhythm. And we were the first ones to discover that. But even more significant than, oh, wow, pat yourselves on the back, you made this big discovery, was that anybody can do that whenever you want, at any moment of any day. You could be in a phone call that's going south, and you could do what we were discovering in the lab. You could literally focus your attention around your heart, slow down your breathing, just breathe more slowly, and find anything to try to appreciate in that moment. And darn if your rhythm isn't going to move into that smoother pattern. Why does that matter? Part of what we found out and why heart rate variability became such a thing ultimately was that the patterns of what our heart's producing go to every cell in our body. You can pick up your heartbeat on your big toe, no problem. On your fingertip, no problem. On any cell of your body, no problem. It's a powerful signal. And we learned, and then validated it, we learned because other people are already checking this out, that the electrical signal produced by your heart is so powerful. Number one, it's about 60 times stronger in power than what the brain's putting out. So the heart's like your power plant in your body, electrically and magnetically speaking, way stronger than what the brain's more like a substation electrically and magnetically compared to the heart, which is more like the power plant. The signal is so strong, and electrical signals being what they are, the electrical signal produced by your heart passes through the skin and can be measured out into space. And that's not weird. That's science. That's physics. Electrical signal, it's not stopped by the skin. You drive under electrical radio tower, electrical conduit back in the day when we listened to the radio on our car, and it would cause static, because the static was that field that was being produced by the transformer up there, and you could drive through it, and you're driving through a field. Well, everything that's living and everything electrical also produces a field. So the fact that the human body also produces a field of electromagnetic energy is not a shock, because it's just physics. So we were the ones that kind of made that connection, and that also, not only is it that rhythm either chaotic if you're stressed or beautiful and efficient when you're in a happier state, not only is that affecting every cell of your body, and you feel one way or the other depending on which one it is, but also it's affecting your brain. And so the smooth rhythm is like the brain saying, yes, please give me more of that. Which is why when you're feeling good, or you're standing in a shower and think, before you turn to cold because you're so convinced Wim Hof's going to be your enlightenment. Before you do that, you're still in the warm water zone.
That is me. That is me every morning. I love it.
No problem. But before you do that, those moments are often moments of high creativity. And we figured out the reason is your system is like, it's not just relaxed, it's grateful. And that state changes the rhythm of the heart. That rhythm is going to every cell in your body, including your brain. And your brain is saying, thank you, I can perform so much more effectively now. So you remember things you'd forgotten to do. You have that idea out of the blue. I need to take care of that. Or now I know what to do. And so we just came along and said, you can't be showering every time you need a creative idea. You can't reach an impasse. You know what? We're loggerheads here. Let's just have a shower. That's not gonna cut it. You got to figure out some way to change your state, right? Yeah. So we figured out, you can do it quick. You don't have to go off and do something different.
Yeah, that was one of the most, because I I've talked about this before. I have a history with binge eating, and one of the biggest sort of things that helped me work through that was this idea of change your state. Because when I would change my state, my thoughts and what perceived desires I have for whatever food or whatever was coming my way completely dissipated because of where I was when I was able to change my state. And now I rely on that all the time. Whenever I find myself trapped in thought patterns of fear or scarcity, or how am I going to get through this, or blah, blah. Because when I look back on my life, it's like somehow, some way I got through things. And then, but in this moment, I'm like, how am I going to get through this? And then when I just stick to the practices, it completely shifts. So 100%. And that's something I wanted to get into too, because I heard this crazy study that you guys did, and I believe it was you guys, where you took groups of people and you would put different images in front of them. And you did it where you would do like horrific images and very pleasant images. And the results of this shocked the hell out of me, because what you guys found was that the heart could signal what the next, like would respond to whatever the next image is before it even came up on the screen. So it would know to go into a certain mode, whether it was like, it would release certain neurotransmitters for happiness or for sadness or anger before the image would even come up on the screen. Am I correct that that was with you guys?
It sure was.
Yeah,
I was
7 seconds, right? 7 seconds before.
Yeah, I was a subject in that study, so I have a vivid memory of the experience of being in it. And it was as you described, and I can give a little more detail. So, yeah, each subject was sitting in front of a computer screen, majorly wired. We had a skull. Each were wearing a skull cap, so all kinds of brain waves were being tracked. There was GSR being measured, heart rate variability was being measured. At least those three were all being measured while we were sitting in this experiment. And what happened was the computer was randomly generating images, and they were all over the spectrum of everything you can imagine, from a baby with a kitten, to a mother with a baby, to two people graphically making love, to violent scene where it appears that someone is literally being killed, to incredible scene of nature, to the most ugly garbage, or so it was all over the place in terms of what our potential emotional reaction could be, from happiness to sadness to shock to horror to passion to erotic to like like, okay, back up, a little much. So it was intense to go through this as a subject. And so we would be told to hit a button, which would reset the system, and of course you're being measured the entire time. There's no. It's not like the measurements on you personally was starting, and it was just constantly being tracked. So it knew when that moment was happening, and it was after the button hit that the computer then had some time to randomly generate whatever the next image would be. And so the computer didn't know what the next image would be, because that was, let alone did you. And what was discovered is, as you said, was that a high percentage of the people were able to, their system was detecting what type of image it was going to be between 6 and 7 seconds before the image actually appeared on the screen. So the system, the heart, was predicting somehow, could feel that there's going to be a loving one next, feel it was going to be incredibly violent and troubling, feel that it was going to be super sexual, feel it was going to be just tender, and could detect that in advance. The brain was also detecting it, but slightly after the heart. So it appeared the signal was first being received here, and then kind of, there's of course communication going on all the time. So the heart would transmit that, and the mind would register it as, and then do whatever in a normal situation you might want to fight, protect yourself if the expectation was that this is going to be a threatening image or a threatening situation. So yeah, that's what happened. It was pretty startling. And there were other researchers. Part of why we even did that study, there was a study done before us at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is another one of these organizations, been in California for 30, 40 years. IONS is the acronym. IONS, started by a NASA astronaut who had a life-changing spiritual experience going to the moon, and came back like life is not what we thought it was. As an astronaut, his whole worldview was changing in front of his eyes, and he was one of the originators of this institute called IONS. They had done a similar study, not looking at the heart, just looking at the brain, and noticing there was this precognitive sensing before the event had actually happened. And again, that assumes that, well, then that must be happening in life in general. That's not just about when you're sitting down in front of a computer about to see an image, because your system is somehow scanning and detecting and picking up information of what maybe is about to happen.
Do you have any insight? Do you have any insight on evolutionary, like from an evolution standpoint, why we have that sort of mechanism?
From an evolutionary standpoint, well, Well, I think it on the most basic level, it's survival. You know, to be able to detect something even slightly in advance could be life-saving. You know, if you pick up on something, and I mean, even the common language we often talk about. I just had a gut feeling, and I acted on it, and I saved the kid, or I turned just in time, you know, whatever. I just had a feeling, you know. So we kind of commonly accept that there is sort of precognitive, intuitive moments that we can get into. So I think that's part of it, but I think there's a much bigger picture about evolution, which is what we're really capable of. And so the ability to sense things that our mind would not validate or be able to believe was possible is just what we are. And I mean, that's a whole conversation to me that excites me a lot, because all the stuff about brain and quantum is amazing and fun in terms of validation of we as humans are capable of such higher levels of performance than we thought. Yeah. But to me, it's also about redefining even who we are and what we are, that we're not just beings to get better and better and better. We are wildly capable beings, sparks of God, how I think of it. Actually, I'm non-religious, and yet I can't help but say I'm a child of God. Sorry, and that's just what I've concluded after all these years. No way around it for me. And so to me, that's exciting to recognize that we are part of something, whether you call it source, universe, the one, whatever you're comfortable saying, that we are part of an intelligence so much bigger than us. And as we are able to let loose and release a lot of the programming we've all been raised with, and that the culture tends to reinforce, when we can release that and come into the true power that is us through the heart, it's a wild opportunity. And,
it's amazing that you're bringing that up, because it makes me think, like, obviously one of the questions that came up when we were researching for this podcast was your 2009 to 2011 stint with cancer. And everything you're saying right now is like something that's very common amongst people who have this life, you know, whether that's being reminded of things or they learn these new things. We had a yoga instructor whose husband passed away on the podcast, like for our first season, like 2 years ago, and how that, you know, her being there for her husband, you know, they were in their late 20s, like that was a life altering experience. And she learned so much spiritually. A lot of people are non-religious before they're completely atheist, and they have this experience and they're like, okay, I believe in something greater than myself. I don't know what the hell that is, but there's something there. So during that 2009, 2011, that experience, was this a reaffirming for you? Or did you gain new understanding in these places for yourself, spiritually and scientifically and everything that we just spoke about?
It's a great question, deep question. Definitely new understandings. Definitely I allowed myself to experience a lot of emotions in the process of what I went through. And so yeah, I was diagnosed with cancer. They knew it was a large tumor. They were pretty confident the surgery would take care of it, and it got the cancer. But in the treatments that followed, which were not chemo, luckily, they were just immunotherapy. But I started getting staph infections. The staph migrated to my blood, which is a call from the doctor saying, this is a life-threatening condition, go to the hospital now. And so 5 months after the surgery, I'm hospitalized for the staph that's now floating around in my blood. And it's life-threatening because the way staph works is if it in the bloodstream, which is passing through the heart, if it gets into the heart, it can cause clots to happen, and the clot can then get shot out into your body, and you could potentially die of a stroke.
That is a funny motherfucker, isn't he? You do all this work with heart and HeartMath, and here you go, having to face your heart. I love it. Please continue.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously I got through all of that, but then I had arthritic hips for a lot of reasons, from running on roads for too many years, too many miles, scoliosis that I was diagnosed with when I was a kid. And so that was now getting a lot worse because my body was dealing with all this other stuff, and everything was kind of breaking down, and I felt like an 85-year-old man. And it was absolutely frightening. Worse than getting the cancer diagnosis was losing my mobility and feeling like I can't even walk downstairs without holding on. And I was a dancer, and I'm a mountain goat when it comes to hiking. I can scamper up a hillside because I got super strong quads. And suddenly walking downstairs, I'm hanging on to rails because I can't support myself. Like, this is not okay. There's nothing about this picture that's okay. Cancer, I'll be fine with that thing. Staph infection, I'll be fine with that stuff. Not being able to walk, no way. So got through that, had double hip replacement. But there was in the process of all this that when the word life-threatening gets used enough times, and while I didn't feel that I was that close, it wasn't like, bring your, get the priest, get your family. It wasn't anything like that. But nevertheless, when you hear the word, you can't help but, just the word cancer for the average person is like, all that happens, all that transpires in your mind and in your emotions, all the expectations, all the preoccupations. So as I got free of it and started to heal and began to realize I will not only be okay, I'm potentially better than okay. I'm potentially, it's kind of up to me now. It's, how good you want to feel. And I began to kind of embrace that idea that how healthy I become really is up to me. My orthopedic guy who replaced the hips said, you have no restrictions. Don't do a complete back bend. I said, oh no, really? Oh man, why did I get the surgery? I can't do a back bend. No, that was not my reaction. I was like, okay, fine. I won't do a back bend. Not a problem. That's it? You mean I can do pretty much everything else? He said, yeah. So it's kind of up to you how good in shape you want to get. And I took that as a challenge. And a few months later, hired a personal trainer and then just worked myself back into the best shape I've been in 30 years. And started dancing again and couldn't believe that I could actually dance on titanium hips. And now what I tell people is I got titanium hips. Instead of feeling like that's going to be a problem, it's like I got indestructible hips. Don't mess with me. Mm. So anyway, through this whole process, there was this layer after layer of like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting this. I'm getting to do this again. It's particularly the dancing. The fact that I could dance again just brought me to tears so many times. Mm. I adopted this practice that has been around for 30 years called 5 Rhythms. I became a 5 Rhythms guy. And there's a community in the Bay Area that's been doing it for 30, 40 years. And of course, it started in New York. And there's a big community all over New York too, 5 Rhythms people. And it was a savior for me. It was like, it was giving me a way to move and a way to express myself and a way to kind of come to terms with some of what that period of my life had been, which included the ending of my marriage, included the death of my mother, included stepping down as CEO of this organization that I was completely devoted to and it had inspired me and I had inspired others. HeartMath, I stepped away from that. So it was a period of massive change. I had many dark nights of the soul through all this process, even after I made the decision to step away. Like, what the fuck were you thinking? This is the worst thing you could have done. Little by little, I realized, no, this is all supposed to happen.
What was the apprehension to stepping down?
Well, so much. I was CEO at the time, and while there were other leaders also, I was very much one of the faces of the organization. So I was out there all over the world teaching, speaking at large events, mostly in the corporate area and healthcare, like big hospital systems. I've been teaching at Stanford. I continue to teach HeartMath at Stanford. I'm in my 24th year now teaching it. And so I was out there in a lot of places, a lot of platforms. And so in stepping away from that responsibility meant some people felt kind of like, wow, we didn't think you were going to walk away, And so letting people down was part of it. And part of it was just, I was part of that family for over 20 years. I'd known the founder for 30 years. And, there was some guilt, there was some shame, there was a range of human emotions that I was experiencing. And at the same time, feeling like there was this other part of me that was starting to reawaken, that was more about my creative expression and was needing to awaken, I didn't know where that was going to go at all. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a strategy at all. It was like, you got to take care of yourself, dude. If that's not clear to you yet, something else will pop up to convince you that finally you have to really focus on not just the body and all the stuff the body went through, but a whole nother level of really aligned with where you're supposed to go next. And that was a sobering process, because there were times when I didn't know quite how to do that, and I wasn't aligned, and things didn't go well. You know, it wasn't like, oh, just slip right into that mode. Well, I just let go of every safety net I had, many of the relationships I had. And it was like, it was scary in many ways. And I knew it was the right thing, but knowing one thing and then being able to feel it, all the time were not always easy.
Bruce, it's amazing. Then this brings me to my next question, actually, based on, like, obviously the first line in your bio on your website is about being a Renaissance human. And I know that the word Renaissance, the meaning behind that word, it means rebirth. And I see throughout your entire story, everything you've talked about through this podcast today has been multiple rebirths you've experienced. And I know that's something big that you're working on. And I think it's fascinating because in this life, I'm fascinated by people who do multiple things in their life. Like, they're not tied down to this one thing. Like, when I read your bio, I was like, I'm so happy that we're having someone like this on, because I read a biography of, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's had 3-4 careers and more, and done so many things in his life and had so many side hustles. And I'm like, it's amazing that right now in life, I feel like we're breaking out of that shell that the society tends to put us in. Like, oh, you're an engineer, you're just an engineer. And that's it, right? You can't be creative if you're an engineer. You can't be this, you can't be that. And if you try to say that, they're like, no, you're an engineer. But I feel like you've shown that. You've kind of experienced the blend of California. I live here in the Bay Area, so every time we talk about it, it's funny because I just moved here a year ago from New York.
Oh, awesome.
So
where in the Bay Area are you? Where in the Bay Area are you?
I'm currently in Mountain View. So I'm like in the heart of everything.
Yeah. I know. I drove through Mountain View 85,000 times.
Yeah, it's beautiful out here. And, I get to go to Santa Cruz Mountains and do all that. So every time you talk about it, I'm like, oh my God, like this is a beautiful place. But I love the fact that it blends art and technology. And you, in your life, you have done that. Like, you've blended this, your past was all art. You've gotten in your HeartMath and everything you're currently doing in your life. You've really embodied this Renaissance human. I don't want to say Renaissance man. And I heard you say this on another podcast that's not a thing anymore. Now we're kind of beyond that. We've evolved. It's a Renaissance human. And I kind of want to hear more about that. Like, in society, do you see that more happening more? Like, more Renaissance humans are coming into place? I know it's a big project you're working on right now. Like, can you just talk about that a bit?
Yeah. Well, I think it's happening a lot. And to me, and thanks to millennials in large part. I mean, I think there's a lot in this generation, and Gen Z, I'm sure as well, but especially millennials that I'm aware of, that aren't willing to buy into the I'm a one-trick pony and I'm just going to be my parent and stay in the same job. And my dad worked for the same company and on 17th Street and Park Avenue South for 35 years. And I've changed careers about 35 times. It feels like not quite, but I've completely reinvented myself about as many times. My mother was a school teacher for 25 years and stayed and had a wonderful life. And that was then. And that made great sense then, but it doesn't make sense now for most people. So I think there's an urge in people and to me, it's not just about wanting to try different things from a career standpoint. That may be how it plays out. But what I've concluded, having reflected on this a lot because of my own life experience, for a while, because in my case, these were major life changes. I mean, to go from actor, singer, dancer, successful, not struggling, agents, like, what do you think? Why? What do you mean you and Joanne, you're both, what? What's the matter with you guys? Leaving HeartMath, a lot of people are like, what? How could you leave HeartMath? Other people saying, good for you. You're honoring the spirit in you that knows you need to grow in a new way. But many of these were like really wrenching. And then when I moved back to New York, that was like a huge one to me, to kind of let go of the Bay Area. That was such a warm home for me, and been a place I've been longer than anything else. And then coming back to New York and realizing there were phases and more phases. And each time I would recognize another one, it would be like, really, another one? Like another reinvention I need to go through now? And then I hit a point somewhere in the last 18 months where I began to realize, actually, instead of dreading this, to whatever degree I dread this, because actually I'm proud of me. I'm proud of the fact that I am willing to be courageous enough to make radical shifts in my life and come out looking pretty damn good through the whole process. I don't just mean physically how I look, but meaning like it has worked. It's been the right thing to do, as challenging as it could be. I've come to realize that, as you said with the word Renaissance, that the term Renaissance man, which has been around for 100 years or so to describe people that embrace multiple passions. Now it's called multi-passion sometimes. So you're a banker, but you're also a concert pianist, and you're also an artist, and you're doing all those at like world-class level. So that was sort of the classical description of a Renaissance man. Well, people started calling me a Renaissance man a few years ago because I was singing and I was dancing, and even professionally, and I was running businesses, and I was an author, and I'd had this rebirth of my health where I, had some pretty major issues. And they say, man, you've had like a whole renaissance in your health, and you're kind of reinventing yourself. You're a Renaissance man. I started thinking about that term and thought, well, number one, it eliminates half the world's population, so can't use that phrase. But it's just out of the blue, one day the term Renaissance human occurred to me, and I thought, wow, that sounds so different. It sounds modern. It sounds the future. It sounds like everybody, not just. And so what I've defined Renaissance human as is not just a new term for the artistic elite or a new label that we get to be proud of because, oh, I'm a Renaissance human. It's more like the way I look at it is everybody is a Renaissance human. And what I mean by that is that being human means we are in a constant growth. It's constant growth. It doesn't mean constantly changing our job necessarily. It could, but it means constant growth. It doesn't. The old model was you grow and grow and grow, and you go to college, and then you're kind of fixed. But then, God forbid, you hit 20 years later, you hit the midlife crisis. Like that shouldn't be happening. Like, oh, something's really wrong. That you should be questioning your life. No, that's it. That was supposed to be happening all along. Actually, self-awareness is what it is to be human. It's to continually grow and to continually absorb. And there was a point in my evolution about 7 or 8 years ago when, in fact, I'd moved to Sausalito. So, which is this place where Est started, and the guy who founded Esalen was around there. And so much started. Alan Watts, who was still a very influential philosopher. He's British, but he lived in Sausalito for many years. There was a whole tribe of them back in the 60s and 70s that were the fathers and mothers of a lot of what's now kind of commonplace. And I found myself saying, I'm in love with learning again. I'd hired a voice coach. I was going to these dance events and learning to move my body with titanium fucking hips and realizing I got titanium hips. This is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. I gotta get flexible again. I can strengthen the muscles and make them all flexible again. Now I'm like indestructible. So, but the energy in me was like, I'm in love with learning again. I just want to learn. I've been teaching so much, learning and teaching, but teaching so much. Now there's so much, and realize I just need to absorb, and I want to be in love with life. I want to be delighted and enchanted with life. And that was an energy that just was kind of gradually growing in me. And then one day I started to name it and realizing I am so glad what has happened. This is amazing. I'm so grateful for so much of what's happened. And that became the energy of what I mean by Renaissance human, that it is when we're grateful for each little moment, we can continue to learn. And so to me, life is a journey of continually birthing new parts of ourselves. So we rebirth, we continue to birth. And 5 months ago, I became president of a graduate school for holistic studies. And it was like, okay, here we are again. I live in a 7-bedroom home in Connecticut. It's an Airbnb. I'm one of the residents.
Wow.
Wildly different than the 42nd floor of a high-rise on the Hudson River. And everything about my lifestyle is different as of 5 months ago. And I'm having to dust off old skills from when I was a CEO of HeartMath, of being CEO of this organization now.
Wow.
And I'm like, every day it feels like I'm birthing. And sometimes and oftentimes, I have to be honest, it's been a painful birth. It's not been all like, oh, just push it on out and you're good to go. There have been some painful times.
Yeah.
But that's the spirit of Renaissance human, is that we are all Renaissance humans, and it's our birthright. It's what we're supposed to do, is to fall in love with life and to continue to love the opportunities, knowing it's not all going to be a piece of cake. Saying you're going to love life and actually doing it in those dark nights or not is the work of saints. But that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I love it, man. I mean, that's so refreshing for me to hear, because I found within my own life a very similar sort of, if you look very closely, it seems like a scattered path. I've had all these different jobs in hospitality, then in marketing, but I'm also really interested in philosophy, and now I'm doing graphic design. I used to be a copywriter. So it's like all these different things somehow find their way into my life. And I've had pushback from loved ones being like, what are you doing? But then when you look from a bird's eye view, you see the connections, and you see how right now where Matt totally makes sense for how I'm developing sort of physiologically in my life, psychologically in my life as well. So I just want to commend you for always, because I know what that feels like, to make those decisions where you're like, I don't know what the fuck is next, but something in me just doesn't feel right to be here, even if it's a cushy place to be, even if it's nice and works. I had a really awesome job a few years ago where I basically did nothing except hang out with people that I loved. And even that was like, I gotta get the fuck out of here, because there wasn't enough of that friction, there wasn't enough of that growth. So I highly commend you, and that you're definitely a sort of North Star as to what's possible when you follow that intuition. So aho to you.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that a lot. Really appreciate that, Jesse.
Of course. Something I wanted to, we actually wanted to segue near the end of this conversation somewhere a bit different. But before we go there, something I wanted your perspective on was, so when we think about the heart and we think about how intelligent and powerful it is and what it could do for us, when I started becoming really interested in personal development, most of the books I was reading was teaching me how to think differently. It's teaching me success principles. It was teaching me how to make money, how to build businesses, how to carry yourself, how to interact with other people from a very strategic sort of logical standpoint. And then that was my only conception of what personal development meant at the time. And then I stumbled into Peru. I had an ayahuasca experience, and I was like, holy shit, personal development has nothing, not that it has nothing to do with that realm, but there's so much under the great white underbelly there's so much under there as to what it means to develop as a human. And if you can take care of a lot of these things, some of these surface level sort of systematic approaches, they kind of just happen because you have the depth to just naturally apply it in your life. So I'm curious to know, and I find that there is a huge distinction when people talk about personal development, that a large majority of people I've interacted with who find themselves saying that they're in that world are really just touching on not surface level, but strictly mind level things, and not tapping into what's deeper, which is where the heart is and the gut and all that's available there. So as someone who's watched personal development, really closely, that's crazy. You live near Alan Watts. So someone who's watched,
I met his son in a houseboat.
That's crazy.
A few years ago. The guy's like completely ordinary. He sails. The fact that he didn't come across as the son of this amazing philosopher. He's just like, ordinary guy, just real good guy. Like, hi, I'm Mark. You know,
That's crazy.
oh, great, I'm Bruce.
And so I'm curious, as someone who's watched this industry, because it is an industry now, develop, what has happened that we've sort of really missed the mark on that? Like when I hear people talk about it, where have we really missed the mark on why isn't there so much more of a larger focus on what's going on the heart level, what's going on the energetic level, and how that influences everything of the mind and that front?
Well, it's a great question. I think when you think about how a lot of it started, and going back even to people like Dale Carnegie and Norman Vincent Peale and people that were the kind of the originators of a lot of the positive mindset, power of positive thinking 100 years ago or 80 years ago, a lot of it was kind of hacking your way into to use the current language, hacking your way into the success that is the American dream. So it was like, if you really want to get that American dream, which is all about money and ambition and success and status, here's the fast track of how to do that. You don't have to struggle. You can actually, it can be easy breezy for you to make a ton of money, all those values that are still the point. But I think part of what's going on now, and particularly in these last few years, and if anything, probably even amplified by COVID, is challenging all of that yet again. Where our generation made an attempt, baby steps, at challenging the status quo, which was all about money and profit and commercialism. And I mean, my father, bless his heart, in the 30s, when he was in college, had concluded that war was a setup of the military industrial complex. And a lot of war was all about the munitions companies and profit. And that was my dad 70 years ago, not 80 years ago, coming to that conclusion. And so a lot of these have been strands, but I think nowadays there's a lot of people just challenging the assumption that it's really all about money and success in those traditional ways. So the personal development was kind of geared to getting you the success that we were still buying into culturally. And a lot of it was that. And so what's interesting is that are those people that maybe started out as that, like the Tony Robbins of the world, who is a brilliant guy, and he loves HeartMath. He's been praising it for 10, 15 years at least. He's all into HeartMath, as many of those guys are, because they all sense that there's something deeper that they've got to get to. That as long as, and I'm not trying to single out Tony Robbins at all, but the whole field of personal development, as you say, a lot of it is still geared towards the success, ambition, power, status model. And so it's only going to go so deep, because if you start going deeper into what's life really about, what's my soul's journey here, it may not be about, it isn't necessarily to be the most successful one, or the highest status one, or most followers, or any of that. It may not be about that at all. It may be, how can I serve the most in this lifetime that I possibly can serve, which is what my life is about. So no, I'm not going to end up on anybody's top 10 wealthiest or top 10 most influential necessarily, but my life is always been about how can I serve the most, and where can I serve the most. So I think that is shifting a lot, where the generations now are it's much easier to kind of throw aside some of those assumptions, and life is kind of forcing us to. All the college kids who can't be in college now, or the crazy fees that they were going to spend so they can be online. Really? That's the answer. So it's causing this upheaval in again, our assumptions about how life is supposed to go. We got to get to 4 years of expensive college in order to get the good job. Really? Well, why don't we throw COVID at you and kind of challenge that assumption? So to me, it's about that kind of all along in the world, there's been a deeper thread of where the real power in life is, which in my view is more about the heart. And so to me, there's just more of an opening now. And I think it's the less sexy path, right? Because the personal development path is still mostly, I'm not trying to equate everything that's personal development into just the success model. There's tons of stuff about just bettering oneself and being a happier person, being a better parent, and all that's within the realm of personal development. But I think even those things at a certain point, they start to realize we have to go deeper, because if we don't tap into the spiritual power within the person, we're missing the core of who they really are. It's just the way it is. It's not like you have to be spiritual to believe it. It's just kind of like how it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of a realization that's growing a lot at the same time that the world is crazier than ever. So everything is just more contrasted, more opposite in a way, deeper and deeper at the level of appreciation of the power of the heart. I mean, look at somebody like Joe Dispenza, as you said, Ruben. That Becoming Supernatural, chapter 7, it's called Heart Intelligence. Basically, the whole chapter is about HeartMath. Even when he's not saying the words HeartMath, most of that is HeartMath stuff. And Joe's a friend. We were texting last week, and I'm a big fan of his work. I've been to his week-long events. I've been to one in Indian Wells right before the lockdown last year. In fact, a bunch of people got COVID there. We found it later. It wasn't the thing yet. It was early February. Nobody in America was thinking about that you could get it at a big event like that. And yet dozens of people, it turns out, did. But I'm a huge fan of his work. But if you look at how his work has evolved now, he talks all about heart coherence as being the prerequisite to brain coherence. That if we want the mind to function at its highest possible level, you got to get the heart coherent first. And how do you do that? The L word, L-O-V-E, love. And Joe's about love. I mean, he always was to an extent, but if you really look at the last 15 years, how he has evolved, it's more and more about the heart, more and more about, that's where it all starts. So I think his own evolution it mirrors kind of what's happening in society. Is personal development is more about mind, more about kind of going along with the cultural assumptions, but here's a faster, better, quicker, smarter way of doing it. And I think a lot of people at a certain point realize, but wait a minute, that's still not soul satisfying enough to me, because my soul is saying something. I have a soul, and it's talking to me, and it needs to be heard, And
I've heard you mention this a few times on the podcast, so I'm just curious before we segue into the next topic. You say that during the 70s, the 60s, and 70s. This was the first sort of surge of protesting and fighting the powers that be and challenging all these assumptions that our culture has had. And now we are having a resurgence of that. And so I'm curious to know, watching this watching it from the ability to see sort of things, maybe pattern what happened then, maybe some things that are different. What opportunities do you see happening now that weren't available then? Maybe it's because of the internet. Maybe it's because of other things that are happening at a sort of quantum level or deeper level that you see emerging now that listeners can be aware of and sort of really capitalize on. That's different than back in the 70s.
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's hugely different. I mean, there's a lot of parallels. I actually wrote an article on Medium about this. I called it "How Renaissance Humans Can Save the World," and talking about the parallels between the foment and the unrest, but also the cultural explosion that was happening in the 60s and 70s to today, and the similarities. I think one of the biggest differences is there's I don't know if it's a critical mass yet, but there's numbers now that just weren't like this back 50 years ago. It just, there's the numbers, I think the awakening of the generations now. I don't want to paint it just like, oh, the millennials are all awake, the Gen Zs are all awake. I live with a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old who run video games an incredible number of hours a day, and that's about it from what I can tell. There's not an aspiring to this kind of conversation at all. So it's not like it's a slam dunk for everybody under 30 or under 40, not at all. But I think there's just numbers now, and much more so, and of course the ease of communication, the fact that we can do this and it's instantly, or however soon you release it, it's available broadly, and anybody can listen to it anywhere. The availability of information and sharing is way different. I mean, just so different it's unquestionable. So it's both more challenging because it's so easy to be addicted to all these ways we can communicate now, and rob us of the deeper connection to the heart. And at the same time, we have an opportunity to talk about this kind of thing in a conversation like this and share it. That wasn't possible. I mean, yeah, there were good radio shows back in the 60s, I guess, but not necessarily having quite this level of conversation, right? So I think there is a deepening of the humanity's awareness. And I think what this administration has helped galvanize is, man, compassion is the thing, and we need it. And working together is the thing, and we need it. And really honoring each other and where we're all at is the thing, and we need it. And it has made it so obvious to a lot of us that, man, the choice has gotten clearer than ever. But to really go the path that I feel I need to go in my heart means I got to dig in more, because the opposite view is so entrenched and so intense. So it's like, I got to dig deeper into the earth. I got to go deeper into my heart, because the noise is more intense. The noise of other, and I'm just not talking about politically now, just in general. I think it calls those of us who have been awakening in whatever ways we're awakening to say, let's get serious, guys, and keep on going. It's not just a matter of being woke and then you're kind of there. This is a continual process. We're birthing new parts of ourselves, guys. That is the point. To whatever's going to happen in the world is going to bring new levels of stretch to all of us. This pandemic will be over at some point. Do we really think then everything will be back to normal when the pandemic is like that? Like this is the only one that we'll ever have, or that this is the only global thing, and there won't be other things that could be as bad or worse. So we got to kind of, to me, it is about going deeper in the heart to what really matters to us. And I've had an interesting perspective because I teach a lot online, HeartMath, but also this whole work that I call Renaissance Human around creativity, about how many people have been recognizing, God, there is an energy in me that is not being satisfied. And it's a part of me that wants to express through writing or through art or through whatever. It wants to come out. And it's like when we've all been so restricted because of lockdown and all the restrictions that we've been under wherever we are, it makes it even more obvious. Okay, I can't do this, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. What can I do? I could develop myself. Yeah, you can still do that. No one said, and you're not allowed to develop yourself while you're wearing the mask. No, and even if they said that, they can't. So that's all still up to us. And most people, it's like, well, where would I go except my heart? Because that's where you find the fulfillment, and that's where things can start to line up.
I love it, man. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I resonate with that totally. Having going through the shutdown, it was definitely a call to, all right, let's saddle up and start going deeper. This is a winter, this is in seasons of life right now is a winter, and it's an opportunity to really explore. So absolutely. So I know we're coming closer to time. Hopefully we won't go too far over. I know you also wanted to potentially lead us through a practice here at the end, and I want to make time for that. There was a topic though, since we do have you here, that we wanted to chat about, because this is something Ruben and I talk about a lot, in just conversations between ourselves, as we're getting older too. I feel
sorry for you guys getting older, but it's okay. You'll get used to
it. Yes. It's a new thing,
You hit a point where it does shift.
And in
a good way.
That's what I heard. It talks about, Napoleon Hill talks about that as well. So I look forward to those days too. But something we talk about a lot is death, and not necessarily our own death, but the death of our loved ones. I know you mentioned your mother passed away recently. I also saw that your brother also passed away recently, and it seems like this is sort of fresh in your purview. But you also seem to be very excited about life, very happy and joyful and ready for more adventures and ready to take on all sorts of things. And um, uh, as two guys who are watching their parents get older and watching the changes happen and watching loved ones, whether it's our grandparents or loved ones change and even pass on, there are times where I don't know if frightening is the word, but it's such a, like, I don't know what my life is going to be like when those things happen. I don't know what, whether for good or for worse. I don't know what my life will look like when, my mother or my father or other people in my life pass. And I also think, especially because of everything that's going on, this is a fear that maybe a lot of people are experiencing right now, this fear of death of loved ones and what's going to happen. And can I go visit this person? Can I go do this? Because God forbid something happens. And going through this, I found that there really are some beautiful perspectives on death and narratives on death that aren't really explored. And as someone who's had to face it in a very raw way very recently, I think it'd be great to sort of hear what you have to say on this topic and how we can, what we can take away from that.
Yeah, wow. It plagued me as a kid a lot, the fear of death. I didn't know that was what it was exactly. I was around 4 and 5 and 6, and I was afraid to be away from my mother. And it got so extreme, they hired a psychologist to work with me. I stayed home from school 47 days in first grade because I was afraid to be away from her, afraid of losing her. Why I had that fear? I have my theories, but I don't know exactly. She lived another 54 years, so it wasn't like she was sick at all. But I had a very strong fear of it, and it was a fear of death. It was like really just like scared of death. And I think some things that happened around me at the time that had influenced me, but not so much conscious memories. But when I was around 14 and 15, and the Vietnam conflict was really raging, and I had 2 brothers there at the same time, and I already explained what happened with my one brother and how close to death he came. But there was a period, and this is all in a period of time where in the same year, both of my brothers were wounded in the war. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. This is all like within a 12-month period. And right after that, a beloved uncle died after heart surgery. And that one was very personally ripping. Just a beloved man, wonderful man. It was such grief in the whole family. And it was an era of a lot of death. I mean, for the first time in 30 years, Americans were dying overseas by the thousands, and brothers and sisters of my generation were dying by the thousands in Vietnam mostly. And so there was this just and riots. There were wonderful people being murdered because they were trying to break down segregation. So they were being murdered for trying, right? There was a lot of death happening. And there was a period after my brother came back from Vietnam, the brother that was more severely wounded, where I felt literally being stalked, like there was stalking. I was a baseball player. I was playing in games, and I'd be like trying to focus on the game and feeling like almost these shadowy figures of death like around me. I was, in retrospect, I was like, dude, you might have needed a psychiatrist. But I don't know. I think it's just kind of a reality that you can have when this is. I mean, I'm a highly sensitive person, as you guys can tell, right? I feel deeply, and I was feeling. I don't know what exactly I was feeling, but I'm not sure why I was feeling all that, but I was until I could finally get through it. I think that's eventually why the acting and all that felt so good to me, because it was like, I get a chance to express and move through feelings and turn them into something fun instead of something that's going to kind of weigh me down and worry me a lot, because I knew that was a part of my personality. So I definitely, it's been a challenge for me in my own, just kind of my own makeup. And as I've kind of continued to explore myself spiritually, I want to mention something. As I mentioned, the book that was so influential to me early in my life, the Autobiography of a Yogi, and I now want to make an acknowledgement of a series of books that have been at my side for the last 8 or 9 months, and they're called The Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East. These books were written 100 years ago by a guy who was part of an expedition that went to India, China, Tibet, Nepal, all over the place in search of ancient civilizations, and found ancient people who were living hundreds of years, looking like they were 30. And they were so tapped into the divine that they were literally not dying, and evolved to such a point. The books are completely mind-blowing. If you're skeptical, you will put them down within the first page or two, because some of the stories are just like, what? Like, this is like it's out of a George Lucas film or something. But there's a sincerity and a depth that comes through these books that are pretty stunning. And I share them because they have been incredibly impactful to me, not just about death. There's much more to the books than talking about death, but the part of what has become alive in me is this idea that there isn't actually death. I mean, yes, the body dies. So far, it appears to be 100% mortality. At least that's what doctors tell us. And yet, what does that really mean? So I think in my own life and watching the passing of my father, I was at his bedside. He passed 14 years ago. And my mother, it was actually 8 years ago. My brother, another brother, was 10 months ago. All Alzheimer's, actually, all three. Although my father, ironically, was the most conscious even at 93. He still knew it was me, but I could have a one-sentence conversation with him, and then we'd start up that same conversation again. He said, "Remember that time when you were a senior in high school?" And I said, "Yeah, that was really cool, Dad." "Remember that time when you were in high school yeah, that was a really awesome one. Yeah, I really love that. Yeah, you remember that time?" That's what would happen. But it was sweet and very endearing. But I watched my father as he was making his transition, and he was a singer, and he loved great music. And my brothers and I decided we would get the Handel Messiah, the Hallelujah Chorus, and that whole, I don't know if you know the work, but it's a long work. The Hallelujah Chorus is merely one of the segments of this beautiful, beautiful long work. And he loved the whole thing, and he would sing it at the top of his lungs. And so we had that playing for him on a continuous loop. So it was always playing in his room. And when he was conscious enough, he would try to sing it. And you could just feel his spirit like ascending, like it was in transition. And then a part of him would be back in his body, and he'd be afraid, like, "You're trying to kill me, you're trying to kill me." And he's, no, Dad, no, it's Bruce, it's Denny, it's all cool, Dad. And he made his transition finally through that. And my mother was far gone, and we didn't know that she was going to die when she died, so none of us were around. But consciously, she hadn't been able to connect with anything or anyone for several years. She was so far gone in an Alzheimer's fog, but somehow her body stayed on the planet. So there've been plenty of death has been close, and I think for a long time I had to allow myself to really feel the grief of it, and allow myself to kind of be okay with experiencing grief. And then I think as I was okay with that, I could feel the enormous love that I also felt. And of course, a lot of what you're missing and what you're grieving is the loss of that. But on the other hand, we can all be grateful for anything at any time that has ever happened. And we can be sad that it's not happening anymore, or we can be grateful that it happened. It's that choice about everything all the time. You can feel like, oh man, if I'd only had banged at my fucking heels when I was 9 years old, I would have been a really good baseball player. I mean, that happened for 2 years. I couldn't run or jump as a 9 and 10-year-old because I messed up my heels so badly. And so I could regret that had happened, or I could be glad that So we've always got that choice. So to me, in pondering like the loss of loved ones, it's challenging. I mean, last night I found out a dear friend of mine who I happened to see a Facebook post saying her husband's name is back in the ER. Prayers and love our way, please, and kind of a pleading. I thought, what's going on? I have no idea. He's got COVID, and it's really serious, and he's hospitalized, and it's a heart problem, and it's a lung problem, and he's immunocompromised on top of it, and his daughter's got it too. And suddenly this woman is a dear friend of mine. Her life is collapsing around her. Her daughter's okay now, but the beloved husband of 25 years is, I mean, I don't think it's quite at fighting for his life stage, but it's huge. And I spoke to her last night, and I just sat there loving her. I just thought, I love you. And I just was wanting to help her feel some strength through it, because it was so easy to feel the fear and the grief and the fear of the loss, and trying to just help her stabilize and get her laughing, and which we were able to do a couple times, and it's exactly what she needed. And just laugh at the humor of that. Still, we can find, you can always find something, right? You can always find something. And so it's a sobering time. There's no easy answers, but I think part of it is accepting whatever emotions we are going to feel, and embracing them, not because you want to wallow in them forever, but to be able to feel them, because that's what being human is to go through this life experience and feel. And it's okay. And I think the more we allow ourselves to feel, when you lose somebody, it is horrible. But I think when you are accepting the feeling of it, it's easier to then, I mean, when my brother passed away a year ago, he was an absolute, at best he was an agnostic, but really he fashioned himself more of an atheist. And I had this thought very soon after I heard that he had passed, and I got over the grief of, oh my God, I'll never see him again. I got over that, and then I had this thought that just made me laugh. I thought, he's having the surprise of his life, because he was convinced no God, nothing after death, and he's having to face the fact that there is. So it just kind of made me giggle, because it's like, I got you, man. I have you. I got you. And so I think death is so complex. There's so much to it, but I think just the starting with just the acceptance of whatever we're going to feel, and it's really okay. And the more we honor what other people are feeling too, and allow them to feel it, and not try to tell them not to feel it, or try to make them okay, or try to lift their spirits too quickly, but just let them feel what they need to feel. And there is a beauty. What's the song, Beauty in the Breakdown? There is a beauty in that it is so sweet. And gratefulness, it can be just on the other side of that. Just you allow yourself to feel that, and then you think, God damn, I love my mother. Yes, I miss her. My God, what a mother she was. To allow yourself to be in that in between. And I don't know if that helps, but those are my thoughts on a Sunday morning, about Sunday afternoon, about death. But I'm also in this mode of what is possible as humans. There are already so many examples, even in our lifetime, of things that people said, there's no way that could ever happen. I mean, for my generation, the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall was massive shock in a good way. And after that happened, it was like a lot of people said, well, if that happened, anything is possible. Similarly, if COVID happened, like anything is possible. I mean, in a good or bad way, anything is possible. So I'm kind of onto this idea that who says death has got to be the way we've assumed it always was? Who says other than that's our belief based on evidence? If there was also evidence, to use the commonly cited example, that it was physically impossible for human beings to run the mile in less than 4 minutes. There was plenty of evidence. No one had ever done it. Therefore, it was impossible. And then somebody did it, and then thousands of people have done it since. So that's just a simple, almost trivial example. But we were, as a humanity, we were convinced, no way. That's just no way. As was humanity convinced the Earth was flat. And for billions of years, it had been round, laughing at us. You think I'm flat, huh? And finally, somebody figured it out, and they, wow, it's really not flat. No, it was never flat. You thought it was, and you were convinced because the evidence you had, because you couldn't get to see it all the way. So your evidence convinced you, but it doesn't mean that was really the case. So I think death is the same. That our preconditions are so strong that either it's blackness, or it's all the religious stuff of you're going to be punished or rewarded. So you better be good little boy and girl or girl. There's so much cultural conditioning about it. It's hard to break free of that. And just, well, what if it's like just this kind of transition that kind of is like not anywhere near as rough as it seems. Who knows? Maybe that's really, maybe why not at least explore that as a possibility? What if, as I say in each one of these creativity courses I do, what if I'm right and that every human being really is born with all the creative energy they could ever need? That doesn't mean they're necessarily artists, but it means they're born with creative energy. And how do I know that? Because you're born with the power to create fucking life. If you can create another life and you're going to tell me you're not creative, okay, fine. You can say that if you want. But I'm saying you got the power to create life, which would include your own. So then prove to me you're not creative. So I say to people, so what if I'm right? And I don't think that's like a stretch at all. I don't think that's some radical idea, actually, at all. What if I'm right? So what if the death thing, what if we're just making these assumptions based on the evidence up to this point? Of course, the rational people listening to this would say, okay, now he's crossed the line. Because it's like, okay, yeah, there is a little bit of evidence on this one. Yeah, well, there was a lot of evidence that it was flat. There was a lot of evidence we couldn't beat the 4-minute mile. No one had ever done it. There's a lot of evidence. So anyway, I'm just saying, why not open up to the possibility? And even if we can't live, even if we can't be immortal, who's to say that the whole process can't be so different? And in dealing with my own aging and dealing with life-threatening conditions and dealing with aches and pains and limitations in my body over the years, that there were so many times I realized I was also, yes, there was a pain that was real. I was also then buying into, oh, here we go, or this is the aging body, or this is restriction, or this. There was a thought that came with it that I needed to unthink. I needed to replace, or else that pain. That there's pain in life. I mean, we all have pains, and when you're 20 or you're 30, you don't take it anywhere unless you're a hypochondriac. The older you get, you start going, oh, what was that pain? Why am I suddenly feeling that when I do that? Oh, I'm getting old. And we're buying into a mindset. We are. So what if you could undo those thoughts? And that's what Joe Dispenza is all about, right? And that's what HeartMath is all about, is that there's another intelligence in us that is the heart, and it's out of time, and it's out of linear thinking. And it's the quantum world where we're just in the now, in the power of, in my view, the creator of God, because that something made us. I'm part of that, whatever that is, whatever you're comfortable calling it. It's not just, I didn't do it. I didn't make this. Something else made it. And it made a lot of other things too. And I'm connected to all of it. So whatever you're comfortable calling it, I don't care. Fred, Jimmy, Jose, Maria, Louisa, whatever you want to call it, it's fine. So that's my spiel on death for today.
That was a good one. Thank you. So
I really appreciate being asked. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. So that was fun. That was kind of fun to play around with that.
Sure. No, it was very lovely. Thank you. So we are over time. I want to be respectful. If you do have time to take us through a practice, you can. If you don't, we will just cut this part out, and no one will ever have to hear it.
Well, it's the process where I did it when I did the portal thing that Sunday or that Saturday. I did a version. That was like 10, 12 minutes. I mean, I usually would do like 12 minutes, 12, 15 minutes even. So I'm fine not doing it. I mean, whatever, I'm fine either way. I feel complete relative to this as a conversation. If you'd like me to do, I mean, it's a way different mode to go into, but I could easily shift into it. No problem. But I feel complete it's not like they're expecting it either. So.
No, they're not. All right. Well, then I think we've ended on a beautiful note. Thank you for taking us through your journey. Ruben, if you have any more, final questions, please feel free to take the time.
No, the only question I will ask is, Bruce, where can the folks connect with you, find you, see what you're working on and what you're up to? Just share with the folks so they can connect with you.
You bet. Thank you for asking. Well, I am my name on every social media. So Bruce Cryer on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Those are the places that I am. I have a site called brucecryer.com, cleverly named. The work I do now, this institute called the Graduate Institute, I want to give a shout out to them. That's learn.edu. That's our URL. I don't know how they got that 20 years ago. Learn.edu, but that's the URL for the Graduate Institute, where I'm now president. And everything we're talking about today is kind of what the Institute's about, meaning we just offer a whole lot of programs to apply more holistic thinking to whether it's health, writing, leadership, thinking, learning. It's a range of stuff all around that. So learn.edu is the URL for that. And I'm available, and meaning as a human, I'm open and would love to hear from people. So reach out to me in any of those places.
Wonderful.
Oh, and I would be remiss without mentioning my album and my meditation CD. So Spotify users, I have an album out called Renaissance Human. And it's an album of original songs that I created with these two amazing brothers named Isaac and Torald Koren, Koren. Album is Renaissance Human, and it's on iTunes, Spotify, a lot of places. And I've also created a guided meditation CD called Sonic Sanctuaries with my creative partner named Gary Malkin, who was my Oberlin roommate, and also an Emmy Award-winning composer and brilliant, deep, wonderful, wise guy in a good way. And Sonic Sanctuaries, and it's guided meditation set to beautiful music that Gary composed live as we were recording. And two longish tracks, meaning 20, 26-minute long tracks, me leading meditations, also on Spotify, iTunes, wherever. So Sonic Sanctuaries, the meditation, Renaissance Human, the songs, me singing, by the way, co-wrote all the songs. And it was a trip doing that, I tell you. I loved it.
Oh, well, there we have it.
There we have it. I think that's it.
I think that's it. No, that's amazing. And all of that will be in the show notes as well, folks, so you can just click in easily. Thank you again, Bruce. This was such a amazing, multifaceted conversation, and I just love learning from you. And I'm hoping that there will be a part 2, because there's still so much that I had questions for, but we are limited by time. But there's always a part 2 that can happen. So,
well, one time I will get back to the Bay Area, because I'm still teaching at Stanford, and it's twice a year I do courses there, and I was always traveling back to the Bay Area for that. And now it's all online, but I got family, I got my tribe in the Bay Area. So one day I'll get back out there, and hopefully soon, and we can meet. I'd love to do that.
100%. Grab a coffee 100%. Or whatever it may be. Yes, please.
You bet.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Bruce. We look forward to sharing you with the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You guys are both amazing and very fun and very deep, and loved it.
Amazing.
Thank you, Bruce.